Hello, Alex Wilson. You've been invited to co-present for the Manitoba Teachers Society for a 2-day workshop entitled Decolonization, an Act of Reconciliation.
Right, yeah.
So I really like how you introduce yourself and position your cosmology.
Sure, well, I'm from the Pawhuska Cree Nation, which is surrounded by the country of Canada. And I'd like to introduce myself in terms of the land where I grew up. And our family area is called Pawhuska Tata. So it's Pawhuska Tata and Opaskwayak. And Pawhuska Tata means the place where you get out of the canoe and pull it. Mm-hmm. And so, like many Indigenous nations, our identities are intimately linked to land. And in Manitoba, especially because we have, as you know, over 100,000 lakes, water is a very important part of land. So water, land, and sky are all part of our cosmology. And by cosmology, when I say cosmology, I mean how we fit into the big picture of the universe.
Right, so can you explain how you get to your land from Winnipeg?
Yeah. Well, depending on where you are, first thing you have to do is make your way to a waterway. And so we have the Assiniboine River running east to west, and then we have the Red River running south to north, and all the water flows north in the province. Mm-hmm. And so you would hit one of those rivers and get to the forks and then start heading north. The Red River feeds into Lake Winnipeg. Lake Winnipeg is the 10th largest freshwater lake on the planet. Also the #1 endangered when it comes to the life of the lake. Mm-hmm. And so that's another thing. Even when you're going through this journey with me to get to OCN, imagining the landscape, but also understanding the impact that we as humans have had on the landscape. Mm-hmm. So you can do this mentally, or you can physically actually get in a canoe and come and visit. So the Lake Winnipeg feeds into Cedar Lake. Cedar Lake, one part of Cedar Lake is dammed by the Grand Rapids Dam. Mm-hmm. So here we have another intervention on kind of the natural landscape. And then from Cedar Lake, it connects to Moose Lake and the Saskatchewan River. So the Saskatchewan River Delta goes all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Mm. So that whole delta, which includes the South Saskatchewan, the North Saskatchewan, the Bow River, and many other little tributaries, is one of the largest freshwater deltas on the planet. And also one of the endangered ones. Mm. And so if you think about the Earth, the Saskatchewan River Delta is kind of considered to be the lungs of the planet. Oh. Yeah, because it's boreal forest, and then it's also delta marsh. So muskeg, it cleans the water, but more importantly, it cleans the air. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about some really important ecosystems that connect through all these waterways. So part of our cosmology is understanding how the waterways connect, but how we as humans connect to them as well. And so those were the original highways for Indigenous peoples for the past 10,000 years here, because those were created during the last ice age. And all of this knowledge comes through in our oral traditions. And now, of course, anthropologists and archaeologists are catching up and saying, oh yeah, well, this is how long you've been here. And we go, well, yeah, we know that. Okay. Because we have those language markers in our stories, etc.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you showed the teachers an image of the constellation known in Western astronomy as Orion.
Yeah.
Can you share how this constellation represents identity and relationality for you?
One of the things that we used constellations for, obviously, was for navigation. Again, because we're people that are on the move, knowing where to go in the spring for fish, and in the fall for certain kinds of fish and moose, etc. So the stars and the constellations are really important in terms of marking our movement navigationally. But they are also navigational in terms of our oral traditions and our stories. So when this constellation is in a certain place, you know, the seasons start to change, you start to prepare, you do things differently. And the constellation Wisagijak is one of the prominent ones we see, and especially in the fall. It's so crisp and clear, and it's right there. And that term Wisagijak, some people may have heard before. It's fairly common in Manitoba to hear it because it's a Cree term, known as one of our trickster characters. But if you break down the word, the first part of the word means sour or tart or wayward, and the end of the word achak means star. But if I said kitachak, that would mean your spirit. So there's an understanding that there's a continuity of energy that exists out there in the universe that connects to us, our bodies here today. And that energy, or that spark of life, we call spirit, or in the bigger universe, star. And so Wisagijak is the character that can shapeshift.
Right.
So it's a creator in some ways, always creating and always teaching us through creating situations or stories or evolution, really, explaining the evolution of animals and humans. But one of the interesting things about the term Wisagijak, in the middle is Sagi, which means love. So that's also a natural law. So one of our most important natural laws in the Cree, in Swampy Cree anyway, a law upon which everything else hinges, is Sagihiwewen, which means showing love in your actions. And so again, there's an understanding, this continuity of energy that came from the Big Bang. We don't know, there's a mystery there, that somehow makes us human, has to do with love, which is very profound. And so there are consequences when that energetic flow is not followed. And so on the highest spiritual level, the explanation is there's just this energy, there's no gender. So really, by learning about Wisagijak, a trickster, or one of our teachers, we're also learning lessons about Cree cosmology. And so by knowing that, then we can understand that all of these other things that we know of today, that we have to reconcile, things that happened in the residential school era, forms of oppression, assimilation, homophobia, sexism, and most importantly, racism, and the way that those all interconnect, those are all socially constructed. So we as humans have created all of this mess. And so decolonization as reconciliation is figuring out, first of all, validating an Indigenous worldview, recognizing that we have valid knowledge, including our stories and legends. They're not just entertainment for kids. They're deep knowledge systems, and they've been handed on for generations. So recognizing that those exist, and then understanding what this very tiny, tiny snippet of time in the history of Indigenous people, known as colonization, that very tiny spot of time has had such a dramatic impact. So reconciliation is understanding that, validating Indigenous first and foremost,
Right.
second, understanding colonization, and third, intervening in it.
Okay, I think I'll just ask you to touch on the image of the tip of the iceberg as being the expression of culture that we see.
Yeah.
And that huge, deep knowledge that's been disconnected through colonization.
Yeah. So if you use the analogy to an iceberg, many people say 1/8 is above, 7/8 is below the water. And so culture is like that. So the bulk of culture that holds all the knowledge is below the water. And then just a little bit is above. So the stuff above is the easy part, material, clothing, food, dance, music. Those things can change all the time quickly, even within a day. And if you think about you and your son and If you have grandchildren yet, probably not, but maybe someday you will. Or think about your grandparents. And those 3 or 4 generations, you may eat different food, wear different clothing, listen to different music, but the core essence, like the core of your culture is still there, right? And it changes very slowly. And so those are the deep knowledge systems. Understanding reconciliation or anti-oppressive education. The idea is to move beyond this kind of surface level understanding that's very easy. It also makes everyone feel good. It's like, let's just celebrate, you know, and go deeper. And the deeper stuff takes work because you have to start to, first of all, validate, as I said before, but look at the deeper meanings like cosmology, epistemology, which is our knowledge systems, ontology, which is what we know to be truth and how we construct it. And then pedagogy, which is what we're concerned most about as teachers. Like, how do we teach? What informs our teaching? It's not just books that we've learned from. It's all of these things that have been passed on to us for generations. And so the process of colonization has kind of scraped the top from the bottom of the iceberg. And so for some people, that's all they have is the stuff above the water to define what culture is, but it's so much more.
Yes, and that's yet for the bulk of society in Canada to discover what a wealth there is once that reclamation gets stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, people tend to stereotype and romanticize Indigenous people, and it's really easy just to say, oh, let's go look at a powwow, you know. But, you know, that means you're denying the truth of what's happened. Like, instead of examining residential schools, assimilation policy, how did that happen? You know, how can we stop it from continuing?
And I just constantly go back to that breach of relationship.
Yeah,
it goes back
absolutely.
to the treaty.
Yeah. Yeah, so relationality is really key. And that's fundamental to most Indigenous cultures. Relationality, not just between people, but our relationship to the environment, and then not just the environment, but our relationships to theory and concepts, because we're very intellectual people. We research things, we philosophized, you know, we have our own physics, we have a mathematical system in Cree, all based on the number 4, which is very complex. And so all of these things, you know, are part of that deeper level of the iceberg.
Yeah, I hope it becomes more centralized in our curriculums, and just how we can adopt that, also that understanding as well.
Yeah, and so what's happened is colonization has severed all of those relationships. And so that term epistemicide is the severing of knowledge systems that's happened. So most people have heard of genocide, or femicide even, which is killing women. But epistemicide is really key, because as educators, you know, we're concerned with knowledge transmission. And how can we undo the impacts of epistemicide? And a lot of the knowledge that's passed down from generation to generation is intimately connected to land. So if you remove people from land, then what? You know, how do they get that knowledge?
Well, you've got your land-based education program.
Okay. University of Saskatchewan land-based masters.
Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and we're going to be posting it on our new website.
Great. Right on. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.